Hey there, and welcome to Fundamentals Factory. I'm Valerie, and today we're diving into one of the most important parts of a real estate transaction, the escrow process. So here's what we're covering today. We're going to break down the full life cycle of escrow here in Nevada, from the moment an offer is accepted to the day we hand the keys over. Now, why does this matter? Because when you truly understand how escrow works, you build confidence, avoid costly mistakes, and guide your clients like a pro. So why now? Because deals are moving fast, clients have more questions than ever, and your ability to lead them through each milestone is what sets you apart. So here's how we're going to do it. Step by step with clear explanations, real life scenarios, and actionable tips you can start using today. So let's master the escrow process together. Let's go. Okay, welcome to Mastering the Escrow Process in Nevada. Let's jump right in. Okay, so here's what we're going to go over today. We want to make sure you fully understand the escrow process. You're going to learn the full life cycle of a transaction from opening to recording to handing the keys over. You're going to gain clarity on different roles, such as agents, home inspectors, transaction coordinators. And you're going to learn how to proactively guide clients through each step and milestone through the escrow process. So let's start with the first question. What is escrow? Escrow is a neutral third party which handles funds, documents, and legal compliance. Escrow officer is a key contact, so we need to treat them as a partner. So once you have a fully executed contract, we do something as we call opening up escrow. You're simply emailing the escrow officer all of the documents like your RPA, any counter offers, addendums, and they open up escrow. And as it says here, they're a third party and they handle all of the money in a transaction. All right. So we're going to start off with the Nevada escrow life cycle. So we're going to start with having an offer accepted and opening up escrow. Okay, and again, that's a simple email that goes over to the escrow and title company with the appropriate contracts, addendums, and counter offers. Now, one of the first things that happens once an escrow is open is the earnest money deposit needs to be wired over to the escrow officer. Okay, that escrow amount, that earnest money deposit amount is dictated on the MLS sheet and in your offer. So for this one, let's say it's $5,000. And typically within 48 hours, your buyer needs to wire that $5,000 to the escrow company. So one of the first things as an agent we do when we go under contract is we make sure that step is happening. And you can do that by asking your buyer if they've been contacted by the escrow company. You can contact the escrow officer and ask them if they've contacted your buyer. And eventually we're going to get something called an earnest money deposit receipt. And you do save that in your transaction. Okay. They're also going to provide us with an escrow number and a contact. So they're going to make sure everyone involved has each other's information. They're going to ask for the buyer's information, phone number, full name, email, and cell phone. They're also going to ask for the other party's information as well. Okay. After that, title opens up and they order what we call a preliminary title report. The agent reviews for any red flags, such as any liens, judgments, ownership, and easements. We essentially need to find out if this house is marketable. If there's anything on the house, such as a lien or a judgment, the title company flags it right away and makes sure it's all taken care of before closing. You as the agent don't need to know a preliminary title report like the back of your hand, but you do need to be efficient in finding any red flags in there, asking title for any additional questions you may have. But you're simply going to send that title report over to your clients via email. Should they have any questions, you want them to be able to reach out to the title officer for clarity. Okay? HOA contacted and docs ordered if applicable. So it is hard written into the residential purchase agreement that the seller within just a couple of days has to order what we call an HOA resale package. This HOA resale package houses all documents regarding the HOA. So from budget sheets to expenses to any active litigation, parking restrictions, etc. Now, your buyer receives this HOA resale package typically within 10 to 15 days. That's also hard written into the contract. So it must be ordered by the sellers right away. Once we receive it from the HOA, it gets sent over to your buyers. Your buyers have 5 days to review this HOA resale package. They could choose any reason to back out of this escrow based on that HOA resale package, and their earnest money deposit is protected. So from day one, when that earnest money deposit gets sent over to the escrow and title company, it is your job to protect it at all costs. So that's why timelines and contingencies are so imperative that you know and stay on top of. This is an added contingency. So in short, if there is an HOA, once your buyer receives that HOA resale package, they have 5 days to review. Okay? Buyer due diligence period begins day one. So I'm going to take a step back. Once you have a fully executed residential purchase agreement with any additional addendums and counteroffers, day one starts the following day. Okay? So a due diligence period typically is 10 days. Now, depending on what type of market you are in, you can go higher than 10 days or possibly lower. But within 10 days, that's when we're going to schedule a home inspection. Okay? As the agent, it is your job to show your value, so you can recommend home inspectors to your buyer if they don't have any. Okay? Within those 10 days, here's what needs to happen. The home inspector needs to be scheduled. They need to go out to the house. They need to provide their report of all their findings. Should your buyer want to request for repairs from the seller and any additional negotiations that may come from that, that all needs to be wrapped up within that 10 days in order for that earnest money deposit to be protected in regards to the due diligence period. Additionally, if the home inspector advises any additional inspections as far as roof, sewer, pest, HVAC, that all needs to be wrapped up within that 10 days. You do not need to wait for a home inspector to suggest these additional inspections. You want to make sure your buyer understands they have the right to do any and all of these inspections during their due diligence period. Okay? Now, what happens after that is a lender is going to order the appraisal. The appraisal contingency typically is between 15 and 21 days. Again, depending on what market we are in, you might want to shift that number. And you should always reach out to the lender to make sure the number of days you have on your offer is something they can actually produce. So let's assume that this escrow has a 15-day appraisal contingency. Here's what needs to happen. The lender needs to order the appraisal, which is from a third party. The appraiser reaches out to the listing agent to get it scheduled. The appraiser has to go out to the house to do his appraisal. We have to wait for he or she to produce the report back to us, which could take days. Once we get that report back, if it's lower than the price that we're in contract for, we have to go and renegotiate with the seller again. So let's assume we're under contract for $600,000. And the appraiser goes out to the house and he says it's only worth $590,000. Well, we have a $10,000 discrepancy at that point. So the seller can either come down in price, or the buyer can come out of pocket the $10,000, or maybe we meet in the middle. Perhaps the seller comes down $5,000 and the buyer comes out of pocket $5,000 to bridge the gap of that $10,000. Remember, the lender is only going to loan the amount that the appraisal puts on the house. Okay? All that needs to be done within that contingency date. This one we're assuming is 15 days. Now, if it comes in low and we can't come into an agreement with the sellers and the buyers, you can back out of the contract with your buyers and their earnest money deposit is protected and they do get it back as long as it's within those 15 days, for example. Requests for repairs. So this is all happening within the due diligence period. The agents submit request, negotiations follow that. and any amendments need to be signed and agreed upon within that 10-day due diligence period. Final loan approval, clear to close. At this point, the lender has given a stamp of approval that all conditions have been met. Closing disclosures have been sent to the buyer, and title updates the net sheet. Okay. Closing disclosures. Let's go back to that one for a minute. When we get to this point of having final approval, the lender's going to send your buyer what we call CDs, closing disclosures. This is where they get to see every penny involved into this transaction. Once these CDs are sent to a buyer from the lender, 3 days must pass before we can proceed with closing. There's no workaround from this. So if your close date is, let's say, this Friday, and it's Thursday morning and you learn those CDs have not been sent to your buyer, guess what? We are not closing. We're going to have to push that to Monday. 3 days have to pass, even if your buyers sign immediately. Okay? So when you get to this stage of the escrow process, one thing you're following up with the lender is if these CDs have been sent out. And if the lender gets behind for some reason and they're not sent out in time where we have enough time to close, we may need to do an addendum at that point and ask for an extension on the close of escrow date. Okay. Now we get to the next step, signing scheduled. This is when the title and escrow office is going to reach out to your buyer to get a signing scheduled for them. Now, as a buyer's agent, I recommend you accompany them at this signing for support. The lender can come with you as well, but this is where you're showing your value and answering any additional questions they may have at that point. Okay. Now, what needs to happen in this process is the lender needs to get all of their documents and they need to send them over to the title company. Once the title company has those documents, we'll get your client scheduled. The buyer comes in, signs all those loan documents and the settlement statement. This could take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. So you want to make sure you're preparing your client for that. Okay, they're going to sign away. Now, at this point, they do not get the keys to the house. There's a few more extra steps that happen after they physically go in and sign. What we need to do is make sure the buyer funds with the escrow company, and we need to make sure the lender funds with the escrow company. So what does that mean? Well, the lender who's loaning, let's say a $500,000 loan, needs to send that money over to escrow. And that's eventually going to make its way over to the seller. Okay. So once we have confirmation that the lender has funded, we now need to make sure your buyer is funded. What does that mean? That means they need to go down to the bank, get wiring information, and wire over their down payment and any additional closing cost. Now, once the title and escrow company has the lender funds and the buyer's funds, they can release to record. Okay. With final approval from the lender. Because once your buyers go to the title and escrow company to sign away, those documents make their way back to the lender. And the lender gives a final approval for clear to close. Once title and escrow has that confirmation, they release to record with the city and we wait. So this could take a few hours before we get a final email confirmation from the title and escrow company that simply says, congratulations, this house has officially recorded. And my agent friends, that's when you get to deliver the keys to your buyer and welcome them into their house. So now that was a quick view of the entire escrow process. And now we're going to break things down a little bit further for you. And I'm going to go back to understanding the preliminary title report. So this happens at the beginning when the title company sends this over to you to review. You're going to send it over to your buyer, and it is our job to highlight any red flags we may see. So we don't need to be a title officer, but you need to know when to ask questions. So the top 3 red flags that could kill a deal, unpaid liens, such as tax liens, mechanic liens, or child support liens, all this must be resolved before closing. Any easements, utilities, shared driveways, or access easements that could impact the buyer's use of the property. Any cloud on title. So ownership issues like probate, divorce, or missing signatures on prior deeds. Now, if any of these are an issue on the preliminary title report, the title company is going to do everything they can to get this cleared up so when your buyer gets their keys, they have a clear title. All right, ordering HOA docs. CIC, Common Interest Community, also known as HOA. These packages must be delivered promptly. HOA addendum governs timelines. They have 5 days to cancel after receipt. So remember when I said once they receive the HOA resale package, they have 5 days to review. Okay? Buyers should review all the CC&Rs, any fines, parking rules and regulations, any rental restrictions. There's a lot of community that only allow a certain percentage of those houses to be on the market as rental listings. So these are things that are going to be very important to your buyer. So you want to make sure they read that package thoroughly. Now, additionally, from the HOA resale package, the seller also orders what we call the HOA demand. These are usually ordered simultaneously. The HOA resale package goes to the buyer. The HOA demand goes over to the title and escrow company. This is to ensure there's no HOA liens on the house or any unpaid assessments or any fines against the current owner. And if there is, we need to make sure this is all buttoned up before closing. So here's an example. Let's assume the title company gets a HOA demand and learns that the seller owes $5,000 in HOA fees. Let's assume for the last year or so they haven't paid any of their HOA dues. Well, what title will do is take that $5,000 out of the seller's net proceeds at the very end, pay it off for the HOA, so it gets transferred over to the buyer nice and clean. So that's an example of how that works and what title does to ensure a proper and clean title to your new buyers. Let's go back to the due diligence period again, typically 10 days. What buyers should do during this window? Well, any and all inspections, okay? So if there's a pool, you might want to do an additional inspection on the pool. If the home inspector sees any visible signs of mold, we might want to get a mold specialist out there, okay? Recommend inspection providers list. So you always want to be showing your value with your clients. You don't want to force a home inspector on them because this can come back to you with a high liability issue. Because if something goes wrong or the inspector did a bad job, you don't want them saying, oh, well, my agent's the one that told me I had to use them. I didn't know I had an option. So instead, what you want to do, should they not have a home inspector ready to go, say, these are 3 trusted home inspectors I've used in the past. Here are their websites. Let me know which one you want to do. You take some of the liability off of you. And scripts for preparing buyers, what inspectors do and don't do. Here's an added element that I do to set expectations for my buyers. I let them know that the home inspection report, it's not a weapon that we use against the sellers. It's a flashlight so we truly can see the house that we're buying and understand what we're walking into with eyes wide open. This isn't a negotiation tool. However, if there's big ticket items on this report, such as broken windows, active water leaks, signs of mold, HVAC issues, water heater issues, these are the big ticket items we want to address with the seller in hopes that they will fix it for us and agree to it before we move into the house. This isn't a time to negotiate cosmetic things like chip paint or broken cabinets. And additionally, what I do in my buyer presentation is I print out one of my big scary home inspection reports, because most are big and scary. And I let them see it and feel it before we even get into contract. So when we do receive the report back, it's not news to them and it's not fear-based for them. It is the inspector's job to find everything wrong with this house. But we need to set the expectations. This isn't an opportunity to ask for cosmetic issues. Handling repairs professionally. So negotiation tips for repair requests, strategic approaches to reach an agreement. So we go back to everything I just said. It's about setting the right expectations. What you don't want to do is send 40 items over to the seller asking them to fix it. In my experience, sellers When that happens, they shut down, they get defensive, they're offended, and now they don't want to do anything for the buyers. So instead, we want to be realistic and we want to send a shorter list when possible. That way we can get some big movement from the seller on those items. How to guide your buyer or seller when inspection results come in. Now, if you're representing the seller and you get a laundry list from the buyer, we have to help the seller choose which ones are most important in your opinion. This is where you're showing your value. And I would have let my seller know ahead of time what happens in this process. And I would suggest we keep the ball rolling and we pick some of these items to fix for the buyer. Now, the seller at this point has the option to offer credits. Maybe your sellers have already moved out, moved states, and they don't want to come back and deal with handymen. Well, an option is for them to offer a credit at close of escrow, let the buyers fix it. The other option is they can fix it with a professional. Now, keep in mind, the form that is used to negotiate these repairs clearly outlines that a licensed professional must fix these items. So here's a compliance tip for you. Don't let your sellers fix things on their own because they're handy without it being written out. The buyer can, everything is negotiable. The buyer can agree to the seller fixing things, but I don't recommend it. We want a licensed handyman or a licensed contractor and professional out there to fix any items on this repair for request that the sellers agree to. Okay? Decision points, when to walk away and when to counter. We're not here to convince buyers to buy a house. We're here to guide them and lead them and show our expertise. So if there are hefty health hazards and safety issues, you want to be honest and upfront with them and ask them the tough questions. Do you really want this project after you move into your house? Think about them being a first-time home buyer with kiddos, and there's so many safety issues. You want to come down on the human level and set those expectations for them. Integrity always wins, and these clients are going to be your clients forever if you're honest with them. Don't convince them if you truly see safety issues with this house. It is their decision ultimately, but you want to lay the truth out in front of them always, okay? And there's sometimes we need a counter between the buyer and the seller, and we can go back and forth. This is where effective communication comes into play. Working with the other listing agent or the buyer's agent, having the same goal in mind, being collaborative, okay? We sometimes don't always get everything we ask for, but if I can get 3 out of the 5 and those 3 are the most important to my buyer, we have a deal. Let's keep the ball rolling, okay? So remain collaborative with the other agent when you're negotiating these. Financing and appraisal. Walk through a typical lender timeline with your client. Make sure they're having strong communication. This is where we're showing our value. You want to make sure the communication's on point between the lender and your client. Okay. What happens if appraisal is low? We kind of touched that a little bit. If the appraisal comes in low, we're back to renegotiations with the seller. I will repeat that they can either come down in price or meet us in the middle. If that doesn't work out, we can back out of the contract and the earnest money deposit is protected for your buyer. Waiving appraisal contingency. Here's some risk and how to explain it to your buyers. If we are in a very competitive market in favor of the sellers, your buyer may want to waive the appraisal contingency. That doesn't mean the appraisal is not going to happen, because if there's a loan involved, the appraisal is definitely happening. But what you can do up front to win the offer, if you're in a multiple offer situation, is tell the seller, hey, listen, this is our offer price. If the appraisal comes in low, don't worry, we got it, and we're going to come out of pocket and pay the difference. So you can negotiate that up front. So I just want to make sure you understand when we use the verbiage waiving appraisal contingency, we're not saying the appraisal is not happening. We're just saying we're not going to negotiate if the price comes in lower and that your buyer's going to go ahead and pay it out of pocket. You can also put a dollar amount on this. So something you can write in your offer on under additional terms is something like a buyer agrees to pay up to $8,000 out of pocket should the appraisal come in low, not to exceed the purchase price. So you could put a dollar amount on it to protect your buyer a little more. So getting to the closing table, what is clear to close? It's the final lender approval that all conditions have been met. Now, here's something to think about. There's always a quality check that goes out right before it closes. So if your lender gives your buyer the clear to close, that does not mean your buyer should go open up a furniture credit card to buy $7,000 worth of furniture. It doesn't mean they should go buy that car just because we have clear to close, because that will stop production. So we need to make sure your buyers understand that. Just because we have clear to close, we don't want them doing anything with their finances unless they speak to their lender first. Okay? Who schedules signing? It's a coordination between escrow, agents, and clients. So what happens often is a title company will reach out to the respective agents, the listing agent, the buyer agent, and ask you, would you like to tell me when your client's available, or would you like us to reach out to your client and get it scheduled? I usually choose the latter one, and then I will say I will make my schedule available to be there with them. What's in the closing disclosure? Detailed breakdown of all cost and credit. So remember, those are those CDs I was talking about. This is a full breakdown of all the costs associated with the closing of this home. So when your buyer gets those CDs, the closing disclosures, they're going to know every penny that they need to have ready to get closed and to wire to the escrow company after signing. Okay. Recording and possession. When does recording typically happen? Timeline expectations for final property transfer. So remember, after your client signs at the title company, there's a few extra steps that happens. Okay. We have to make sure the lender funds to the escrow company. We need to make sure your buyer funds to the escrow company. Documents make their way back to the lender. Lender gives final approval. Listing agent and buyer agent say, we're ready to move forward as well. Then they release to record with the city, and by they I mean the escrow company and title company, and we wait for final confirmation. So if all this is happening the day of closing, let's say your clients sign at 10 a.m., you can't expect around a 3, 4, or 5 p.m. closing. Okay? What can delay it? Funding issues, document errors, counting processing times. Things happen in real estate, but I want you guys to be prepared, and more importantly, I want your clients to be prepared. So here's what I always tell my buyers and sellers up front. Think of the close of escrow date like a baby's due date. It can come a few days before, or it can come a few days after. This allows the mindset of your sellers and buyers to be collaborative. So if your buyer needs one extra day, we're hoping the seller says, no problem, let's sign the addendum and move forward. Okay. Script for explaining the process to excited buyers who want the keys. We have to manage the expectations during the final steps. A lot of buyers assume they're getting the keys at the signing table at title and escrow, and it's just not the case. So make sure you're explaining this timeline well in advance so they truly understand every step. Okay. Clarity wins every time. Okay. Q&A, real life escrow scenarios. So here's some tricky HOA delays. Here's a case study. The seller's agent or transaction coordinator forgets to order the HOA resale package until day 12. Now the buyer's review period is pushed back. So when you're the listing agent, you want to make sure you're on top of this and get this ordered within the first 48 hours. Here's what you can do as a buyer's agent. Is make sure that step was taken. You don't want to be waiting around until day 12 and realize it wasn't ordered, and now close of escrow date needs to be updated. So you want to make sure you have good communication going with the other agent so you can ask questions like that. Buyer panics after inspection. Here's a case study. Buyers saw big cracks in the garage and now they want out. It is our job to give them all of their options. So if something like this happens where we see large cracks, well, one thing we can say, it's very common for homes to have foundational cracks. But we can let them know that we don't have to stop at just the home inspector. We can get additional inspectors out there. If they're not wanting to move forward, you can ask the question, would any seller credits make you feel better about this? Or if we were able to negotiate a seller fixing these items, would that make you want to stay in this house? So it is our job just to outline all their options for them. Buyer backing out late. Here's a case study. Managing the process when a buyer attempts to cancel after contingencies are removed. So we want to constantly remind our buyers they can back out at any point in the contract. If all of our contingencies are up, meaning our due diligence period, appraisal period, loan contingency, HOA 5 days have passed, and then they want to back out, guess what? They're going to lose that $5,000 earnest money deposit, for example. So we want to make sure they understand that, and it's our job to protect them. So every time a contingent period ends, I notify them. We are past our due diligence period, and we're now into our appraisal contingency. Here's what happens if you choose to back out at this point. Okay, so you just want to keep them updated through the timelines. All right, so now you are almost escrow ready. Here's what to do next. Make sure you're guiding your clients with confidence. Please study these things. Study your buyer roadmap. Study the escrow timeline. The more you know, the more confident you are to keep your clients on schedule. Ask smart questions to prevent issues. Communicate clearly with escrow, title, and lenders. You can never over-communicate in an escrow process. And stay proactive from open to close. And remember, you're not just closing deals. You're building a reputation as the agent who makes it seamless. I'll see you guys in the next training. You made it! Now you have the roadmap to confidently lead clients through every stage of the escrow process in Nevada. From opening escrow, reviewing preliminary title reports, navigating inspections, negotiating repairs, all the way to closing and recording, you've got it. So here's your next step. Use this knowledge to educate your buyers and sellers proactively. The more clarity you bring to your clients, the more trust and referrals you earn. This isn't just about transactions, it's about transformation. The more you master the process, the more you become the agent everyone remembers. See you in the next module, and as always, go be the professional your clients are lucky to have.